Hi, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying all the stories and content from Community Week so far. My name is Nia McCash. I am the lead platform architect at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and a 2025 ServiceNow MVP. And I'm excited to close the week out by talking to you about dev reviews. In 2023, the university and I won the Devies Award for a citizen-developed application that I helped to review. That experience, as well as a conversation with Willem Zeiler, another ServiceNow MVP, about the Hack for Good session at Knowledge 24, inspired this talk. Talking to Willem was just one way that I've been able to benefit from the ServiceNow community, and hopefully this talk is one way that I can give back to it. Willem did record our conversation, and I will try and provide links in the description below because it will talk about the importance of dev review. So let's jump into it. Before we even start the manual review, part of my team's current process is to run Instant Scan. Instant Scan is available from ServiceNow out of the box. You can find it by typing Instant Scan in the filter navigator. You can look at all the checks that are available to help you with your code review or your dev review. For example, there's a scan available out of the box that checks for access controls on client callable script include. You can click into the check to see what it does and what the recommendations are to resolve any findings that go against that check. I'm going to filter by the script only check because I want to show you that instant scan checks can be enhanced with checks that don't come out of the box. For example, this avoid usage of GSlog. You won't find it from ServiceNow out of the box. This example is from a community contributed repository that's available for anyone to download. The point being is that I've also been able to automate some of my manual checks that I used to do by creating my own instant scan checks. If you're not familiar with instant scan or you want to know more, I will provide some links in the YouTube description below. For the manual review process, when working with update sets and reviewing update sets, I look at the sys_update_XML table or the customer updates table. In fact, I usually have a favorites for this. And here you can filter by the update set that you are reviewing. And here are the columns that I look at when I'm reviewing update sets. When working with scoped applications, I look at the application files table or the sys_metadata table. And in this table, I filter by the application. For scoped applications, I look at this table particularly for 3 reasons. 1, we don't use update sets for scoped application deployment in my organization. We publish to the application repository, so we don't actually create update sets. 2, I've learned through experience that there are certain items that get captured in the application files that do not show up in customer updates. I'll show you an example. So first, I'm going to switch into that application scope. And let's create a business rule. I'm going to call this a trivial business rule. Doesn't really matter what the business rule does. I just created it to show you that when you create a business rule, it appears in the customer updates, for example. So there is an update set entry for it, but it also appears in the sys metadata or application files table. for that application. Now, if I were to create a scheduled job, for example, again, I'm just going to create a trivial scheduled job here. It doesn't matter what the scheduled job does, because what I want to show you is that the scheduled job does not create an entry in the customer updates table. However, if I go to the application files or sys metadata table, you'll see that the scheduled job I created has an entry here. And so this is why when I'm working with scoped applications, I look at the application files or the sys metadata table as opposed to the update set. And the third reason I look at this table instead of the customer updates when working with scoped applications is because we use source control. And if something has been committed to source control, the customer update records tend to disappear. So for example, this business rule that you see in the customer updates table, when I commit this to source control, this entry will disappear. And so I can't rely on the customer updates table to do my review. So let's go back to the update set example. I'm going to look at my list of customer updates, and I'm going to filter by the update set that I'm reviewing. And I found that grouping by actions can be useful. Actually, I found in general that grouping is my friend, but I will start with grouping by action. And I do this to first review all of the deleted items. I look to see if a record was created and then deleted before being promoted to production. That is it some trial and error or investigative work by the developer? And I can see the created date of each record here and also the updated date. Or is this something that's already in production that is going to be deleted when I promote this update set? Because that will have a different impact. Admittedly, this is not an easy process. I do look through the type column and the target name column to give me some hints as to what's happening. But if I don't recognize the entry, I may have to check them individually. That is, I may have to deep dive into each of these records to figure out what's going on. Yes, that can be quite excessive, but how much of this check you do, that is, if you really have to check each record and their existence in production, may depend on your comfort level with the platform, your own familiarity with the instance, and the developer whose work you're reviewing. One of the things I've caught in this process are cases where a new developer deleted, for example, an existing catalog item because we said to them, we no longer need this item. And they didn't know that perhaps our preference is not to delete the catalog item, but rather to deactivate it so that all the records that have been submitted remain intact for historical and audit purposes. Now, let's look at the sys metadata table to show you another example of how grouping helps me to do my dev reviews. So first, I'm going to filter by the application. And the other grouping that I like to use is grouping by class. Grouping by class is useful to eyeball counts. When I look at my apps in this way, it's a quick way to see things that jump out at me. In this example, I see the developer has created perhaps 3 new catalog items. And I see there are 3 matching entries for associating the catalog item with a catalog and associating the catalog item with a category. But there are only 2 in the class of catalog item available for. And this pattern, this broken pattern, it makes me ask, did the developer forget to add a user criteria to one of the new catalog items, or was this intentional? Similarly, there's an extra one in the catalog item not available for. Again, it makes me ask, did the developer add an extra one by mistake, or was this an intentional design decision? Grouping by class allows me to quickly see counts of things like the number of new roles created, how many new modules were added, are there extra transform map fields, or maybe not enough transform map fields. I find it a personally helpful way of organizing the application files. I can review one class at a time and keep track of what I've reviewed by class. The upside of this, as opposed to looking at the application files feature by feature, is that you're more likely to catch things that are extraneous. That is extra stuff that isn't supposed to be there. If you're reviewing a particular feature, you may zoom in on the configuration that make up that particular feature, but it's easier to miss configurations that are not part of the feature that may interfere or cause other issues. Just a note that if you're working with an update set and looking at customer update records, the field is called type, not class. So on the right here, I've got the customer update records. And again, the field names are a little different. It's type, target name, name. Whereas on the left, I'm looking at the application files or the sys underscore metadata, and the field names are display name, class, and update name. But you'll see that the data is very similar. And so my methods of reviewing them are also very similar. So let's come back to our application files review. And aside from the counts, what else do I look at? Well, I don't tend to spend much time reviewing list layouts or form layouts. At least in my environment, they're relatively low risk. But I will deep dive into things with scripts, for example. So business rules or script includes. And let's have a look at this one. I will admit here I can be a little bit more strict or pedantic than most. ServiceNow is a robust platform, even more so with the new RaptorDB changes, and it's used by organizations far bigger than mine with far more data than I have. So I'm unlikely to notice performance issues based on a few repeated or nested queries. But for me, it's a matter of principle. I want to encourage my team to develop good programming habits, and we may not notice any performance impacts due to one non-optimized script, but over time it can add up. So I do look for the nested queries like the example that you see on the screen, and I consider more efficient ways of doing them if I see them. Now I want to show you a kind of weird and specific check that I do, and this is based on my own personal experience. Again, how critical this is may vary based on your environment, but this is the kind of tech debt that I like to steer clear of where possible. So I have here a catalog item with a trivial example. There's this drop down that says, do you require administrator privileges? And if you answer yes, then you're asked for some additional information like the admin account name and the business justification for requiring this privilege. I answered yes, and let me fill out these mandatory text boxes. Now I'm going to change my mind and answer no. When I switch it to no, the value should be cleared. So let me go back to yes to verify. Looks good, right? Now let me refresh this and we'll start over. Because now I'm going to pretend that I'm a client filling in this form. And as a client, I'm going to say, yes, I do require admin privileges, and I'm going to fill in some of the mandatory fields. But just before submitting the form, I'm going to change my mind. And I'm going to say, no, never mind. I don't require those admin privileges. And I'm going to submit my request. And I'll click in here to see that the resulting record does still contain the information that I had put in. They weren't cleared appropriately. And so this can cause some confusion because the answer here is no. And so this information does not apply to this request. But the information is still there and not cleared as I would expect it to. Now, I don't want to go on a tangent to explain why the UI policy didn't work as expected. I did want to show you this to give you an idea of a perhaps quirky thing that I check for when I'm doing my dev review, and that's based on my personal experience. We're back on the sys_metadata table, or the application files table, and this next review is going to most likely be applicable regardless of the type of organization that you're in. If your developers are working with ACLs, you're probably going to want to review them. I don't do my ACL review from this application files table. I will typically go to the table in question that the ACL is for, and I will review from there. So for example, I see that these ACLs are for this sample custom table, and I know for a fact that that sample custom table is part of this particular application. So I'm going to go to that table, and I'm going to go to the list view so that I can go and see all of the ACLs for that table. And again, here I find that grouping is my friend. I will group in this case by operation. And I will review each operation at a time. So for example, create, delete, and so on and so forth, to ensure that all of the ACLs for that operation are appropriate and complete, including the ones that are being added as part of the application. Again, looking at the sys_metadata table, or the application files table, one other thing I've learned through experience is that I need to not only check for what is in the scoped application, or perhaps what's in the update set if I'm reviewing an update set, but also what's missing. If you've worked with update sets, you may know how easy it is to put something into the wrong update set or in default global. Because it's a mistake that I made myself often early on, it's something I've learned to look for when I review other people's work too. Another common thing for our environment is that developers may forget to capture data that is part of the configuration. We do a lot of scoped application development, and for brand new applications, we tend to create new groups in the dev environment, and those groups are often referred to in a business rule. So let's have a look at one of the business rules that is part of this example. And I'll show you, again, this is just a trivial business rule, put it on the incident table, because what we wanted to show you was in the actions, there is an assignment group that is referred to, this database group. And so this business rule is referring to a sysID for the database group. And typically for us, the database group would have been created as part of the development and in the development environment, and therefore should be included in the application files that's moving to production. So I should see it. There should be an entry in here for that group. So part of my review checklist is to make sure that groups are included as part of the application, or other data that need to be included as part of the application. So what I've gone over with you are just some of the items on my personal dev review checklist. Your checklist, or your organization's checklist, may look different based on the priorities and challenges of your own situation. I started by thinking about what common mistakes I've personally made in the past, because they might be pitfalls for other developers too. I think about what common issues new developers on my team might run into. And your checklist might also depend on what the core values and priorities are for your organization. If your organization has an agile startup mentality of innovation and fail fast, then perhaps your checklist might be shorter and less concerned with consistency and more looking for new innovative ways to do things, as opposed to an organization that may work in a more regulated environment. So when I was preparing for the session, I quickly showed my process to some of my colleagues who confirmed that they do similar things. But what dawned on me was that nobody taught us how to do this. There's no ServiceNow University course, no community articles that we could refer to, at least not that I know of. No one taught us what tables to look at or what things to look out for. We each had to learn this on our own over time. So I do hope that this has been helpful to jumpstart those of you who are still learning how to do this. And regardless, I hope you found some value from the content. You're welcome to leave feedback or add information in the YouTube comments. Feedback is always appreciated, but for me, the YouTube comments are probably not the best place to have conversation. So if you want to have a conversation, do reach out to me via LinkedIn or via email. Thank you.